Hey everybody, Dave Eddy here from the International Homicide Investigators Association. I'm the training director for the IHIA, and it's been my privilege to embark on what we have referred to as the Flint to Flame interview series. Today, I have the privilege of talking with Greg Smith in our second episode of the Flint to Flame interview series. And Greg is a current deputy sheriff in the state of Kansas, and also is the executive director of the Kelsey Smith Foundation Incorporated. In a few moments, we'll learn a little bit more about Greg, and then over the course of the next 30 or 45 minutes, we're going to have a conversation about Greg, his background, his family, and why he became involved in the Kelsey Smith Foundation. So, Greg, if we could just get started with you introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit about your professional background, kind of what got you into law enforcement. How long has your career been, and what types of duties have you assumed over the course of your career?
Yeah, law enforcement was something that I got interested in probably in my teens. Actually, the most seminal thing I can remember about cops was I was probably, I don't know, 8, 10 years old, and we were locked out of our house. And my mom called the police, and they came over, and the officer was able to get the door open and get us back inside. And I thought, man, that is so cool that they can do that. And that kind of always stuck with me. So that's always been kind of a driver, I think. But I went to the community college after I graduated high school and majored in criminal justice, fully intending that once I graduated that I would go into law enforcement. But when I graduated from the junior college, I was 20. So I had a little bit of a wait before I could become a police officer. And in the meantime, on a whim, I kind of walked into a Navy recruiting office, and the next thing I knew, I'd signed up and I was on submarines for the next 10 years. So I didn't start my career in law enforcement until after that. At the very end of my law enforcement career, I was part of the Master at Arms Force, which is the law enforcement arm of the Navy. And so I did a little bit of that, and I thought, yeah, I want to keep doing this. So I got out and got hired by a very small department in South Carolina. I was the only officer on duty from midnight till 8 in the morning. And if there was a deputy sheriff close by or a highway patrolman, I might have backup on a call, but most of the time it was just me. So that was my start in law enforcement in South Carolina, and worked there for several years. Went on with the sheriff's department there, moved up to the rank of lieutenant. And then, as is in some states, not in Kansas where I am now, but South Carolina, there's no civil service protection for officers, for deputy sheriffs. So if your sheriff loses the election, there's a chance you could lose your job. And historically, if you're lieutenant or above and a new sheriff comes in, you're not retained. And that's exactly what happened to me. My sheriff lost the election. I stayed on for about 6 months without realizing I was training my replacement. And then I came in after about a 14-hour shift. We'd had a hostage standoff, and I was coming in to do reports. And they said, hey, the sheriff wants to see you. It's like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm dead tired. And I walked into his office, and he said, your services are no longer needed. And that was it as far as South Carolina went. So I went on, we moved back home to Kansas. And then I went to work for several different police departments. Most notably, probably the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. I worked there for several years. And then worked for the community college where I'd gotten my criminal justice degree. I went back and was on their police force for a while. Then I got out of law enforcement and became a teacher, taught high school for a few years. And then the gentleman that is now the sheriff in Johnson County, Kansas, gave me a phone call one day and said, would you be interested in coming back? And I said, yeah, it's probably safer being a cop than it is being a teacher. So came back, and I'm now oversee the government affairs division of the sheriff's office, where I do make a lot of contact with the state legislature and federal government concerning different legislation that may adversely or positively affect law enforcement. And in that time I was teaching, I also served in the Kansas legislature. I did one term in the House, which is 2 years, and I did one term in the Senate, which is 4 years. And then, kind of like my sheriff, I didn't win re-election. So, so that's it for my political career, and I'm back in law enforcement and probably a lot happier.
Well, I can imagine. That's a really diverse background for sure, and I think you're right about the teacher. You know, talking to teachers nowadays, and you know, teachers and law enforcement, other public servants. Right? It's kind of a thankless time for any of those professions, unfortunately. And but I love the story about how you first got interested. Well, the two parts of that story I really am drawn to. The first part, you know, how you got interested in law enforcement. You know, we I had similar situations where you know, as a child, my dad had friends who were, you know, troopers or in law enforcement, and they just always seemed bigger than life, and they looked so sharp in their uniforms and all those kind of things. And I just and that's why I think I cringe every time, you know, when I was working still before I retired, you know, you'd be going somewhere and you'd hear a siren or something, and parents, you know, or aunts or uncles or whoever would always, you know, hey, they're coming to get you, they're coming to get you, and you know what, I get it. It's there's no harm intended there, but you sometimes have those kids that grow up thinking every time they hear a siren or see someone in uniform that they're going to be in trouble, and it's quite the opposite. You know, the most of us got into law enforcement because we wanted to make a difference and trying to make the world a better place. So I love that part of your story, and then of course that you're a fellow veteran. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your service. And that not only did you serve your nation in the profession of arms militarily, but then you continued on the rest of your life in the profession of arms, which is not an easy thing to do. Having been there myself and done it, I can tell you, it's difficult. Uh, Even more so now, kind of leading into the rest of our conversation, even more so in your case, it it hit even closer to home. So in a moment, I'll have you tell us about you know, how the Kelsey Smith Foundation came into being, and just to introduce that to our viewers. Greg, your daughter, not long after high school, was kidnapped and murdered, which led to the founding of the Kelsey Smith Foundation and your efforts to push the Kelsey Smith Act appropriately and rightfully so out to states and at the federal level, hopefully that's underway. Um, could you tell us, if you would, tell us the story that involved Kelsey being taken and ultimately leading to her murder, which then is obviously tragic circumstance, but that ultimately led to this mission that you have, this mission that you and your wife and those around you have to try and pull some good out of a tragic circumstance.
Yeah, Kelsey's story. She had just graduated from high school, just a little over a week after she graduated from high school. She was going to a Target store in our neighborhood to get a gift for her boyfriend for their 6 month anniversary, which I had no idea that was a thing. But and she was on the phone with Missy, my wife, her mom, because there was a specific thing that she was looking for her boyfriend John, and my wife is like the consummate shopper and was telling her exactly where to go in the Target to get the thing that she was looking for. And then she picked up that item and paid for it, went out to her car, and then was never seen alive again. And she didn't come home when we expected. She and her boyfriend were supposed to go out that evening. And it was actually her boyfriend that said, "Hey, my uncle works for a cell phone company and he says that you can locate a phone." And that began probably the most frustrating 3 days of my life, trying to get our cell phone provider to release that information. The district attorney had issued a subpoena for records. The police department was constantly on the phone with the wireless provider trying to get that information and could not get it. They were repeatedly told, we can't do that, we can't do that. And then finally, after 3 days of her being missing, and I mean, there was a massive manhunt going on trying to find her. There were 21 agencies involved, state, local, and federal. And ATF and FBI and an FBI agent made contact with Verizon and said, hey, this is what we're trying to do. You guys have done this in the past, and walked them through it. And they said, oh, yeah, we can do that. And as soon as that information was, well, I take that back. When they got the information, it was late at night. It was dark. The suspected area that Kelsey was in a heavily wooded area. It wasn't safe to send officers in when it was pitch black. So they had to wait till morning. So a Verizon technician came out to the last tower that Kelsey's phone had made contact with and kind of tweaked down that pie wedge to where, you know, he was like, okay, go that direction and she should be over there, or the phone at least should be over there. And they went out, and within 45 minutes of having that information in hand, they located Kelsey's body. The aftermath of that is, you know, we found out that she had been abducted from the parking lot in Target, raped, sodomized, and then strangled to death with her own belt, and then just left out there in the woods. So that recovery was nice, and then at least we had some kind of answer of where she was and, you know, what had happened to her. And interestingly enough, her killer was arrested the same day that she was found. And so then that started the whole court process,
Right.
which took quite a while.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine, you know, the pain and the anguish, you know, is one thing, right? And then you know, we in our line of work, we see that all the time in the victims' families that we deal with. But then to then become one of those families yourself, just the pain and anguish, and then to be compounded by the frustration of not getting information that really you know, could have been crucial to finding Kelsey, to you know, to not having 3 or 4 days pass before that. Just the level of frustration that you must have experienced on top of the anguish and the pain is just it's just unfathomable, and you know, which makes it even more you know, impressive to me, and I'm sure to others that you know, you've and I'm certain that there was plenty of grieving and time that was not what we're seeing from Greg Smith today. You know, but dealing with that entire situation, you know, it's gratifying to see that there's some purpose that you've been able to extract from these horrible circumstances, and then move forward. And I, you know, and as I was looking at your website after our first conversation when we first met, I know that some of the legislative efforts that you've been pursuing have been very successful, and then some others have not. And I was a little bit mortified to see that my own state of Michigan looks like that the Kelsey Smith Act did not pass in Michigan, and I was a little bit troubled to see that, which made me you know, think, well, tell me about the legislative efforts that are going on. And we will circle back a little bit to Kelsey and what your family's gone through and how you've been able to take that tragic circumstance, and even more tragic in that, you know, you've spent your career as a protector, as a you know, as one of the good guys trying to to help victims of this type of crime, and then to become a victim yourselves is just unfathomable. But if you could tell us about the legislative efforts, it's a big leap. I realize a skip from when all this happened and getting justice, that the offender was arrested the same day as Kelsey was found, to skip ahead to where we are today. We will circle back and cover the ground in between, but I'm just very interested, especially because I was disappointed to see that it did not pass in Michigan, where I'm from, of course.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, Kelsey's the impetus for the legislation. We actually sat down as a family. I have 5 children, counting Kelsey. And we sat down as a family and had a discussion of what would Kelsey do? What would her response be if it had been one of us? And my wife said 2 things to me that were super profound. One, she said, this is the killer got Kelsey, but that's all he gets. He's not taking anything else from our family. And those words have really impacted me in a lot of the different things that we've done. And the other thing she said is, it either takes lawsuits or legislation to make big companies pay attention. And we decided the legislation route was probably the best way to go. During the first night when Kelsey was missing, and my wife is on the phone with Verizon trying to get information on the location of the cell phone, and they kept telling her, no, they can't do that. And they kept trying to update they said, we can update your calling plan. We can give you more minutes, blah, 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 that kind of thing. But they wouldn't give the location. And finally, when we found her, Missy we had a conversation with the regional director for Verizon. He came into the office, and there was a bevy of lawyers behind him. And basically we said, hey, look, we're not here to sue you. We just want to find out what went wrong and let's fix it. And the lawyers were, as lawyers usually are, rather closed mouth, wouldn't say much. But the regional director, in a roundabout way, kind of said, we're sorry for the way things went that night. And he said that he was going to take care of our account from now on, that if there was any problems, we were to call him directly. So my wife called back a few minutes later, or a few days later, to ask if they'd been looking at their protocols and to see what had changed. And she asked for this regional director and was told he was no longer with the company. We think it's because he apologized.
Wow.
Put them in a bad place. So the administrative assistant told my wife that the lawyers said that their protocols were adequate. And my wife is rather outspoken, and she said, well, you tell those lawyers this is not the last they've heard from this mom. And that's really what pushed the Kelsey Smith Act into being. And what it does, and the reason it's here, is because under federal law, the protocol, the procedure for getting that location information is entirely at the discretion of the provider. If you don't have a warrant, if it's an exigent circumstance, you as a law enforcement officer have to convince the provider that this is an emergency situation, that somebody could be seriously hurt or die if they don't give you that information. So in reality, the provider is making that decision on, is this an exigent circumstance? Is this an emergency circumstance? The Kelsey Smith Act changes that. And instead of saying that a provider may provide that information, it says a provider shall provide that information if informed by law enforcement that you have an exigent circumstance with possibility of bodily harm or death. So that's the change, just really one word. And we went the federal level first and met a ton of resistance at the federal level. most of the federal folks we talked to said, we think this is a state level, you should work it at the state level. So while there is still a federal effort going on, we've been trying since 2009. We started at the state level in Kansas. Kansas was the first state to pass it in 2009. And now here we are in 2024, where Wisconsin became the 31st state just a couple months ago. But as you mentioned, while that's nice that we've gotten 31 states, there's still 19 out there that we don't have. Alaska was on the cusp this year. I testified in committee in Alaska. It went through the House. We got to the Senate. And the Kelsey Smith Act became a bargaining chip to try to get something else passed. Yeah, we'll pass this if you'll pass that. And it didn't work out. So we were hoping for 32 in 2024, but that's not going to happen. But we'll be back next year. And we continue to outreach to other states that do not have the act. One of the things that I do is I go out and train law enforcement on the use of phones and exigent circumstance, location, that kind of thing. And so we meet officers from other states, and it's very gratifying when we're in a state that has the Kelsey Smith Act to hear the success stories,
right?
You know, but it's also gives us kind of a sense of purpose or determination when we go to conferences and there's officers from all over the country and they come from a state that doesn't have it. And they're like, why don't we have this? And I said, I don't know. Do you know any state legislators that we can contact, that we can reach out to? So there's a lot of networking that goes on to try to do that. And being a former legislator myself, I understand that that's what it takes. Somebody's got to know somebody that'll take an interest in it and actually push to get that legislation passed.
Right. Yeah, which is, I get it. That's the legislative process, and nothing moves quickly. And that's a lot of people probably don't understand that even with the budgeting process, it's, they're already if you're thinking, well, let's make some changes to the budget, they're already, years down the road thinking of the budgets, right? But it struck me that as you talked about this, and that the federal legislation, leaves that to the discretion of the carriers, of the cell phone companies, right? So, I mean, essentially, there's a mechanism that should have been already in place and able to leverage, but for not the big businesses' concern of privacy or whatever it is that their ridiculous concern is that outweighed a situation like this where it's a risk of serious bodily injury or some other event, and it's something as simple as a one-word change from may to must or shall. It's just it's unconscionable that this wouldn't just be an automatic. Hey, this is it's that old saying, right? That common sense isn't all that common, right? Because this seems like to me this would be a no-brainer, like you said, right? A no-brainer that's so I'm glad that you've had success in 31 states. I'm excited for the opportunity for us to chat about this issue and this matter, not only just to hear your story and more about your family and where you are today, but that we can maybe use the IHIA platform to spread the word even farther and wider and cast that net and try and get some support generated in the places that need it. And it would be great to see something at the federal level. It just seems it seems unfortunate, and it's probably an understatement, a dramatic understatement to say unfortunate that politics become involved and things like this, so important, becomes a bargaining chip for other legislation. So thank you for sharing all that about the act, and we will you can count on us as an organization, our board of directors, to help in any way we can push that into the forefront of people's business and their life, so that they can be educated on it and speak to it. So you kind of mentioned the your wife being the impetus to a lot of this, and the mama bear the type of scenario in this. Can you recall the first event or the first activity once the Kelsey Smith Foundation was kind of up and running, and I believe it was pretty quickly after these tragic events, right, that this came to be. Can you remember one of the early events or activities that you did with your wife, and how was that received? How did people respond to to you two, and maybe in particular Kelsey's mother on this front?
One of the things about Kelsey's case, Overland Park, Kansas, where we're from, is for Kansas is a large city, over 200,000 people. But to have somebody abducted in broad daylight is somewhat unusual. But in Overland Park, you just don't expect that to happen. And that immediately triggered a media response. And within 24 to 36 hours, it went from local news to national news. We had all of these, Good Morning America and Fox News, CNN, all these folks were coming in. And so we were living in a glass house. Basically, everything we did was being scrutinized. I remember the morning after Kelsey was abducted was Sunday. I walked out of the house fairly early in the morning, back when papers actually ended up in your front yard, to pick up the newspaper, the Sunday paper. And as I bent over and was coming up, all of a sudden there was a microphone in my face. And she says, "Do you think your daughter's dead?" And there's a cameraman behind her. My first thought was to take the paper and just slap her across the face with it, but I didn't. And I just looked at her and I said, "Yes, I think she's alive." And I tucked the paper under my arm and went back in the house. That kind of let us know media was not always our friend, you know. But we went to every media outlet we possibly could to bring awareness to the fact that Kelsey was missing, because we didn't know what had happened to her yet. So we did all these different shows. Larry King, Greta Van Susteren, you name it, the big talking heads of the time, we were on all the shows. And then it moved to international even. I started getting, at work, I was getting emails from law enforcement officers all over the world about, so sorry about Kelsey, what can we do to help, that kind of thing. Some of them were even coming in languages that I didn't understand. And so I would have to figure out how to translate, the email, because it was written in their native language. Mm-hmm. So it became a huge story. And so we were constantly in the public limelight, which is not something either my wife and I really desired, but we just happened to be there. So because of that public scrutiny that we had, and people recognized us from being on all these different shows, I think that helped us make some inroads as we talked to people. The first event that we did officially for the Kelsey Smith Foundation, which was founded July 6th of 2007, and Kelsey was killed June 2nd of 2007. So it was just literally a month later where we founded the Kelsey Smith Foundation. Our goal at that time was to provide training for young people on how to stay safe. Basically that street awareness that cops have. I got on the internet and I started looking. I said, there's got to be courses like this, for kids. And there weren't. There was a lot of self-defense courses, stranger danger stuff, but it was all for younger kids. It wasn't for teenagers, young adults. So that became our focus. That, and how can we get this information, this geolocation information, to law enforcement when people are missing. So our first event we did, we actually just set a table up
Mm.
in our driveway. Um, we had a company that made wristbands, and then basically on one side it said Kelsey's Army, and the other side of the wristband had our website on it, which is kelseysarmy.org.
Mm.
Kelsey's Army came about because as the news media covered this, one of the news people showed there were 400 people or more every day that showed up at the Target parking lot that were going out and doing area canvasses and, dropping her flyer off and that kind of thing. And the news nicknamed them Kelsey's Army.
Mm.
They said, "These Army's out again." So we talked to that news guy and asked if it was all right if we use that. And he said, absolutely, feel free to use that name. So that's where Kelsey's Army came from. The interesting thing is the police told me afterwards when they went out to do their area canvas that these 400 people, and a lot of them, good portion of them were Kelsey's friends from high school, and they got other people together and went out and did this. But law enforcement told me that when we went and knocked on doors, they said, yeah, somebody's already been here.
Wow.
And it was these volunteers, that it had been out. So we moved very quickly to get the word out. We did everything we could to get the word out. So we were constantly either on radio or TV. And after the second day, I guess kind of my law enforcement training kicked in, and I said, you know what, we've got to keep putting a different angle on the story so she stays, so she's the front story. And so we constantly worked on that. We got our kids involved if they wanted to get in front of the cameras and talk, and that kind of thing. And then because of the research that I had done and looking for some kind of program for kids between basically 13 to 24, I worked with some other law enforcement people, and we came up with what we call a safety awareness seminar. And our very first one was at a church. I think there were maybe 10 people in attendance, 10 kids in attendance. And we went there and provided this information that we had put together for this training program. And at that time, I was the one that did the training. Over the years, my wife has decided to come up on stage with me, particularly at these big conferences. But she was one that she doesn't like her picture taken. She doesn't like to be in front of cameras. She doesn't like to talk to people. So to see her up on stage now and as dynamic a speaker as she can be, for me, is a treat. It's fun to watch her do that. And we tease each other, and I say, see, Kelsey got you in front of the camera. She got you noticed. Because she would, like I said, she was always, no, I don't want to be in the picture and that kind of thing.
Right.
So, but that was our first thing was we did a safety awareness seminar at a church in October of the same year that Kelsey was killed. We also did a fundraiser that year in October. It was October 8th, my birthday. And it was a golf tournament. And we had no idea how to run a golf tournament for a charity. None of that kind of stuff. But out of the blue, I got this email from a course manager by the name of Dean Litton. And he said, have you ever considered doing this? And I mean, we're still dealing with the aftermath of Kelsey had just been murdered. This is only a few months later. And I was like, hey, that sounds like a great thing, but I don't know anything about running a golf tournament. And, this guy, it was a fairly large golf course in our community. And I'm like, this is a busy guy. I appreciate him reaching out. And, I answered his email, but I thought, that's the end of that, when I told him I didn't know anything about it. Well, no, about 2 hours later, I got a 5-page email back from him. And he was explaining, hey, I know how to run these. This is what you need to do. Contact me. And because of him, we had a fundraiser for the foundation 3 months after it had been established. And that first year, we had some radio personalities got involved. They were doing live broadcasting from the golf tournament. We had people driving through, putting donations in a bucket from somebody standing out there and that. And we raised $55,000 from that first golf tournament. So that's our financial engine is every year, we run a golf tournament. The next one's August 19th of this year. And this year will be the 18th annual Kelsey Smith golf tournament, which we call Swinging for Change. But it's also, which is a milestone, but it's a milestone for a couple reasons. One, that we've been able to maintain that and do this for so long. The second is this year will mark where Kelsey has been gone as long as she was here.
Mm.
So that's kind of a bittersweet moment.
I can imagine. That's yeah. Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing all that. It really is uh astonishing to see how much you've been able to do despite the grief, despite the anguish, despite because Greg, I'll be honest, I have three children. I think when we talked before, our youngest is our only girl. And we talked about some of that safety awareness stuff, right? She grew up the daughter of a homicide investigator. And so I didn't talk a lot about work by design. I wouldn't come home and talk about work. It just wasn't something that I did. But they pick up on things, and she would do things now as a young, early 20s college student. She'll text me before she goes for a run, say, "Hey, I'm going for a run. I'm only going about 2 miles. This is the route I'm going to take." Just that kind of stuff that you don't, we kind of take for granted. And when I think about all the good that you've done, starting from this grassroots, just a month after, the disappearance and murder of your daughter, to then put in place this mechanism for change and making people safer and making the world a better place. And it was, as I read about Kelsey on your website, I just I see why your wife, said that. I see why that was your position as a family. What would Kelsey do? She's described as someone who just wanted to help other people, and she wanted to be a light to other people. And you've done that. You've done that in a huge way, despite others. I don't know what I would do in that situation. Understandably, families could just curl up in a ball and just grieve and never recover and never get by that. But you've done something different, and that's again, that's one of the reasons we were so excited to talk with you and feature you on this Flint to Flame interview series. Just for the good that you've been able to generate from this act of evil. And you've talked about the legislative piece, so I won't. And we've kind of beat up the legislature and the slow moving criminal justice system and those kind of things, and technology and the issues there, that they could certainly do better at some things, like providing critical information when it's something important like this. There's other organizations out there, like Parents of Murdered Children and Project Cold Case and Season of Justice. Some of these organizations, many organizations out there that have been created with the purpose of filling some of those gaps that are left behind by the criminal justice system or the legal system. Can you speak to briefly, which organizations or which organization type do you feel are maybe under-recognized, or there could be more of that type, or which ones are in a position to kind of do the most good, in your opinion, having been there and being a part of it yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting how different organizations form. I mean, you heard our story and how the Kelsey Smith Foundation came to be. We um, we went the route we went because at that time we didn't see any other organization out there that was focused on what we wanted to focus on, what we thought was important. That being 13 to 24-year-olds and um, being able to get the location of a cell phone without all the red tape that you have to go through in an emergency circumstance. Um, Parents of Murdered Children, we've worked with them. I've spoken at their conferences. And I think they do really good work, but they're probably not given enough attention. You don't hear about them much. It's really the local chapters that are out there pushing, that do a lot of the work. Another group I think that's probably under, it's not talked about in the mainstream at all that I'm aware of, is NamUs. That information that base that's put together from missing people, trying to figure out who's who, solves cold cases. I think it's underutilized by law enforcement. I don't think that we tap into it enough, and I think maybe that's just because of I know in Kelsey's case there was a lot of video evidence, and the video at first from the Target parking lot, it was not obvious that she had been kidnapped. You watch the video, it looks like she just got in her car and drove away. But Target has their own crime lab, and video and pictures is one of the things that they do probably better than anybody else on the planet. And we have a first-rate crime lab in Johnson County with the sheriff's office that I work for now, that did a lot of the DNA and all that kind of stuff in Kelsey's case. But they said, no, we're gonna give that video to Target and let them deal with it. And I was like, Target? That's a department store. That's not law enforcement. And they were like, yeah, they're better at it than we are. And so
I've heard that too. I've heard that as well.
yeah, and they'll, any law enforcement agency can contact them and they will pro bono do video work for folks. And they were amazing in the hearings, coming up and testifying and everything in Kelsey's case. But that, I don't know what it is that we have in law enforcement where it's like, well, a civilian organization can't do this as good as we can. So I think NamUs sometimes is overlooked because it's not law enforcement, and that's a shame because there's a lot of data in there that could be used.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that perspective, and you see that you travel the country and the world, educating and bringing attention to these important issues. And matter of fact, I think that we're looking to get you to our symposium in 2025, our annual symposium. That's our big conference. We put on multiple smaller ones. We may get you in some of that regional stuff too, because it's so important. And what you especially the work you're doing with educating on the geolocation data and all those kind of things, so important. We want to get you involved in that too. And not that you have a lot of spare time to laying around to throw our way, but we'll definitely to help spread the word, and you can you can certainly be a help to us and the people that attend our seminars. The and I appreciate the perspective on those. So that kind of leads me to the last couple things here as we wind down. You mentioned these organizations like NamUs and Parents of Murdered Children and others that are out there trying to do good work and are doing good work in the Kelsey Smith Foundation. What can, well, I'll kind of end with these couple things. What can organizations and private citizens do to make a difference, do you think? And it's kind of a second part to this question, because you mentioned something about people not knowing how to help or those kind of things, and I think that NamUs being underutilized or Parents of Murdered Children being maybe underutilized or not out there in the forefront quite enough. I wonder how much of that is the result of people just not knowing what to say to people like you, people who've been, a parent of a murdered child. I think it's like when you see someone on the street. We as in law enforcement, of course, we learn how to talk to parents of murder victims because we have to go and talk to them about the investigation and get the background information and the victimology and all that. But I wonder how many people out there just don't know what to say. even, even when someone, a loved one dies, sometimes we just don't even know what to say. So I guess it's kind of a two-part question, Greg. What can people and organizations do to help? And then, what should they say? How should they approach someone like you who's been through something like this, and not feel uncomfortable like they're going to, scratch, tear off a scab or reopen a wound. What kind of advice would you give for both of those kind of scenarios?
Start with the second question first. Um, the thing that I notice is people seem to be reticent to say Kelsey's name. And I can tell you, as the parent of a murdered child, I want to hear her name. Um, if you say her name, you do two things. You acknowledge that she was here, um, and you also acknowledge that she's still out there making a difference. I mean, Kelsey's the driving force behind all of this. None of this would happen. My wife says that Kelsey would be kicking our butts right now, saying, "Why don't you have 50 states?" Um, so it's don't be afraid to acknowledge what has happened to somebody like this, like me or my wife or any other parent that's lost a child. Um, if unless they give you a clear indication, hey, I don't want to talk about that. But most parents do. They want to talk about their child. They want people to acknowledge that she was here and that she existed. So don't be afraid to say the child's name. Don't be afraid to talk about it, and just look at those indicators from that person as yes, I want to talk about it, or no, I don't. We tell people when we speak um, that there are no questions off the table. If we tear up or start to cry, it's not something you did. It's just us still expressing love for Kelsey. My wife likes to say we're still Kelsey's parents. We just parent in a different way.
Right.
So that's kind of the way that we look at it. And I think most parents look at it that way. I don't want to be so bold as to speak for every, parent that's been in this situation, but most of what I find is that. The second thing I find is you were talking about how we have to talk to people in law enforcement that are in these situations. And I have found that even law enforcement is kind of reticent to, nobody likes to make a death notification.
Right.
But I've, when I was doing them, when I was on the street and I had to make a death notification, I thought I was being compassionate and, empathetic and all that kind of stuff until I got a death notification. And the officers didn't do a bad job, but to me, I was like, the horror of what has happened completely washes away anything that's going on, no matter how empathetic that officer is, And I thought I was doing a great job with death notifications. And now that I look back on it, they probably weren't all that good. The one thing I would say to law enforcement when you make a death notification, just say it. Your daughter was murdered. Your daughter's dead, or whatever the case is. I have found that folks tend to get upset later, not at the time. The whole thing, your daughter has passed, or those kinds of things. No, she didn't. She died. And it's better to tell them that than try to circle around it and get to that. As far as organizations, like I said, a lot of these different organizations out there have focused on a shortcoming in some system, whether it be the criminal justice system, whether it be like us, the telecom system and geolocation and getting that information. And like I said, we also focus on training of young people, so I think everybody has their niche and they work in those areas. Sometimes we come together and coalesce on an issue and work. I mean, one of the things I know that we came together with another organization was trying to get DNA from every felony arrest suspect, those kinds of things. And, we went and testified on that. We went up to Congress. We went to different states, all that kind of stuff to try to help that get passed. So a lot of times these organizations can come together and be a very powerful voice in those legislative settings. Um, and I think sometimes we tend not to do the public outreach with the media and say, hey, we're here, this is what we do. Because I think there's a feeling of, I know for me and Missy, my wife, especially in the beginning, like when we're trying to raise money for the Kelsey Smith Foundation to be able to do these trainings and go to these different conferences and present, we had you have a feeling that you're using something terrible that happened to your daughter to raise money, and it feels wrong at first. It's really kind of a funny feeling until something finally clicked in my head and I said, okay, yeah, Kelsey's the reason that we're raising money. Her story's compelling, and this law needs to get passed, or this training needs to be given to law enforcement or young people or whatever it is. And we can't do it if we don't have the financial backing to do it. And then once that clicks in your head, you kind of lose that. Okay, I'm not really using my daughter. We're using her to do good.
Right.
And that's really, I think, what organizations need to do is push that message that, hey, we're out here, we can help. I mean, Missy and I volunteer. If there's a murder case, we can be a really good liaison to those folks, because we've been there, done that. We've been through it. And plus, with me being in law enforcement, I know both sides of the fence. So,
Right. Right. Wow. So powerful, so informative. Greg, I just, as you're talking there and I'm thinking it all makes sense. And, you try and, you know, um, look from the outside in and having been on this side, on the law enforcement side, right? Um, and everyone has probably been touched on some level by some, catastrophic event or violent crime or something. There, no matter how many degrees of separation it is, but to be so up close with it is, it's really eye-opening and it's really important. I love that you've shared. You talked about these organizations and people and what we can do, what private citizens can do, and I think that cliche force multiplier, right, is thrown around a lot for us military guys. That's kind of originated with military, and now it's used in business and all kinds of places. But I look at that. You're a Navy veteran. I'm an Air Force veteran. Um, but that force multiplier concept, it just hits home with me as you were talking. It just hit home with me because I'm going to tell you something, Greg. Kelsey's Army is an army. Being an Air Force guy, it's not normal to talk about the Army favorably. I want to be part of Kelsey's Army. That's an army that I can be a part of, and anybody can be. And these other organizations can join together, like you said, on Capitol Hill and in the legislature, and make the voices heard. That's what's so important, I think, with all of this is just anybody can make a difference. You've taken this tragic event in your life and in Kelsey's memory, she's still out there doing good, making the world a better place. And you're able to do that with the help of others, and because you have a heart to do it. And I just I respect you so much for that. I'm just in awe of all the great things that you've done and in the 18 years since. And again, just what you've been able to do. You could understandably just withdraw and gather the rest of your family close and hold them tight and again, understandably go on with life. But instead, you take your time, your energy, your effort, and you put it into making the world a better place on behalf of all of us and in Kelsey's memory. So just so much respect for that. And I'm so happy that you've allowed us to spend, this hour or so talking with you. I'm excited to get this all put together and pushed out, on our various networks and just so people can see the heart of a father and a mother, Missy, and you and Kelsey's siblings. To see your heart for others in spite of all the pain and anguish, to see your heart through this, heart for other people, for this world, making it a better place. There's so much negativism and divisiveness in the world today. It's so gratifying to see people like you, Greg and Missy, out there just making a difference. And I'm humbled and honored to have spent a little bit of time hearing more about your story. If there's anything that you would like to leave our viewers with as we end this, I'd love to have you have that chance.
Well, I appreciate you having us on. It means a lot to us to be able to get the message out and hopefully, provide information to law enforcement that they may not be aware of when it comes to these situations with geolocation. I'm excited about the invitation to be at your conference next year. We'll be this year. We're going to be at the Dallas Crimes Against Children conference in August, and then September we'll be at the Arizona Homicide Investigators Association conference down there presenting. So we always enjoy getting in front of law enforcement and talking about this and networking and meeting people. Arizona is one of those states that doesn't have the Kelsey Smith Act, so we're excited that maybe we can make some contacts down there. But it's just, it's exciting for us to be able to meet and talk with law enforcement across the United States and see what they're doing. I learn as much from them as hopefully they learn from me. But most importantly, I just want to thank you for letting me come on and tell Kelsey's story and, letting people know what she did and what she's doing. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thank you again. And absolutely. And I'm as I mentioned earlier, I'm disappointed that it failed in Michigan. So you have my word that as a private citizen here in Michigan, I will be talking to a couple of the legislators that I know and see if we can make some movement there. And I think I'm safe to speak on behalf of the board of directors of IHIA. If we can come alongside and partner and write a letter of support or whatever we can do from our organizational standpoint to help the Kelsey Smith Act be spread farther and wider. I think it's important, and I believe that our organization agrees. So, again, Greg, thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with us. Just really, really special time for me personally to be able to visit with you, and I'll look forward to chatting with you again here in the near future.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg.